In 1983, the Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn won the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion. In his acceptance speech, he summarized the history of the 20th century in the following words. More than half a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of older people offer the following explanation for the great disasters that had befallen Russia. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. He went on to say, if I were called upon to identify briefly the principal trait of the entire 20th century, here too I would be unable to find anything more precise and pithy than to repeat once again, men have forgotten God. Solzhenitsyn witnessed firsthand one of the most horrific experiments in totalitarian rule in history. Millions of people died under brutal conditions brought on by an official state policy of atheism. Without God, the people had little to live for, so they became cynical and selfish, dishonest, despondent. Whatever crumbs they got from their tyrannical government could not alleviate the desperate poverty of their souls. Solzhenitsyn outlived this reign of terror and eventually got to see the return of faith to his native Russia. But what he and millions of others experienced during those dark years was not unique in history. Consider the words of an Old Testament prophet who gave a commentary on social conditions that existed in his day some 2,600 years before Solzhenitsyn's experience. He wrote, "There is no truth or mercy or knowledge of God in the land. By swearing and lying, killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break all restraint with bloodshed upon bloodshed. Therefore the land will mourn, and everyone who dwells there will waste away." Like Solzhenitsyn, this prophet saw a connection between people's lack of respect for God and the social conditions in which they live. As the level of respect for God goes down, the level of social chaos and incivility goes up. The rationale for this inverse correlation is not hard to see. First, belief in God requires some degree of humility, that is, an awareness that there is something bigger and higher than me. Life is not all about me. Without that sense of modesty in the presence of the infinite, I tend to become the center of my universe, and others become less important and more disposable. Second, belief in God usually involves belief in some kind of afterlife and judgment. That is, there's a conviction that how I live now will influence whatever life I may experience after death. When people jettison faith in a hereafter, they often lose their fear of their behavior having any consequences. So they behave for the here and now because that's really all they have to live for. And that further degrades the social contract that undergirds civilization. And finally, belief in God is usually accompanied by some kind of moral standard. Now I'll grant that many believers do a poor job of living up to that standard themselves. Nevertheless, that concept of an objective right and wrong is there in the background, reinforcing a sense of duty and responsibility. When people give up on God, their morality tends to become shallow and subjective. And as God is pushed farther away toward the fringes of society, we end up with the kind of dog-eat-dog conditions that befell ancient Israel and Soviet Russia. So whether we're talking about Israel, Russia, or America, the result will always be the same. When people forget God, their society will grow weak and, if the process is not reversed, eventually collapse. But this decline is not inevitable. If people will return to a respect for God, this breakdown in social order can be rectified. But how do we accomplish that? We can't force people to believe in God using political power or any other method of coercion. That's not only immoral, it's impossible. No, the solution is personal. That is, each one of us has to make our own decision to respect God. and to let that decision influence our lives and the lives of others. To the extent that we can all do that, our nation will find the healing that we seek. I'm David King with another episode of Beyond Grasping. Have a great day.